Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Kvetching with Adam and Jarrod. I believe this is episode 7. Are we in episode 7, Adam?
Yes, we are.
Technically, it's episode 8 if we count episode 5.33 and a third, which was our emergency broadcast last week. But so we are back in our normal numeric sequence. Finally, we're sticking with the decimal system, at least for now. As usual, we're going to go around the room and introduce ourselves, especially since we have a special guest today joining us. I'm Jarrod. I teach Jewish history at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and I am a co-founder of the Jewish Studies Zionist Network.
And I'm Adam Fuller, and I am Associate Professor of Political Science at Youngstown State University, and where I'm also the Clayman Professor of Jewish Studies, and I'm also, alongside with Jarrod, a co-founder of the Jewish Studies Zionist Network.
And my name is Stacy Gittleman, and I am a freelance writer based in Metro Detroit, and I have long been covering instances of anti-Jewish and anti-Israel bias on campus, notably the University of Michigan.
Terrific. And I'm thrilled that we have someone, who's been hands-on with the situation at one particular school, especially the school that seems to be rising to the top of the newsfeed, not just this year, but it's really been building up over the past several years.
In fact, the Algeminer had a ranking back in 2017 of, what was it, the 20 or 40?
50, worst, 50, yeah.
50 worst university or college campuses for Jewish students, and the University of Michigan was actually number 1 on the list.
Wow. And I could tell you that I shared this list just today with University of Michigan parents Facebook group that I'm active on. It's how I call my sources, and I got blowback on it. It said, well, it's not a reputable source and it's outdated, and a lot of things have changed since then.
I can assure you, if they were to update it, Michigan would still be, if not number 1, it would be in the top 4 or 5 at this point. So I think it's still a good starting point.
But this is the climate people get on the defensive about.
Well, in terms of the biases, I mean, you're a reporter, you know how news cycles or the news in general works in this country. I mean, if you're a Republican, you're going to say those newspapers are crap. If you're a Democrat, you're going to say those newspapers are crap. And both sides seem to think that the New York Times is crap, which leads me to believe that the New York Times, at the very least, is doing something if they're able to, infuriate both sides. Okay, it's not everyone agrees with me, and that's the point. I'm a liberal, so I'm not a conservative person, and I'm not a lefty. So I'd like to think of myself as being in the middle. Staunch Zionist, though, of course.
Better example is the Wall Street Journal.
I like the Wall Street Journal. It's a good newspaper. Yeah. But it tends to the conservative side. And that one's considered acceptable among some people on the left. It's not beyond the pale. But I will say with the Allgemeiner, yeah, it's slammed because it's a very pro-Israel news outlet, but they don't publish anything that's not true. I read them regularly. That's really their beat. That's really the only thing that they write about. They don't intersect themselves in American politics in any way. They're not, pro-Trump or pro-GOP. If they've happened to have seen that way over the past few years, it's because the left has been more prominent than the right in slamming Israel.
And pertaining back to that list, I could give a litany, a laundry list of things that have happened since 2017 at the University of Michigan campus that kind of reinforce why Michigan is on that.
And that's what we're going to talk about. But one thing I just want to say before is that
you sent me are things that happened after 2017.
Yeah, most of them.
After when I started covering, yeah.
Now, the great utility, and hopefully we're going to get people covering other universities to have someone who's been hands-on with what's going on in Michigan, is because we who are sitting, at our desks, far away and just consuming the news, social media and whatnot, we really have no way of gauging the extent of the problem at these particular campuses, because we're not actually there. We're just consuming what we see in the news, which is horrendous. And we don't know what, Jews are thinking on their campuses as they go through their daily lives. Occasionally, we were lucky to get an interview from students. But I would think that on my campus, if some of the things happened that happened on Michigan, Jewish students at UNCW would feel incredibly uncomfortable. I would feel incredibly uncomfortable. Fortunately, I'm at an institution where this is not a problem. I fear one day it might be, but it is not a problem today. And this gives me a lot of leeway in being able to express myself in ways that would be shut down at other universities. And I believe that's true for Adam as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to turn the floor over to Stacy here, with just, a very open-ended statement here. What's been happening at Michigan? Go back in time as far as you want, and just, lay it out.
Okay. Yeah, so I have been freelancing, covering Jewish issues, and the thing that is my passion is uncovering anti-Israel bias on campus. And every 4 years, it seems like there's a new crop of students with who have come to me or reported that they have experienced anti-Israel bias from a professor, including going back to a student that asked for a letter of recommendation from a professor named of Cheney Lippold. He is a digital studies in the LSA School of Literature, Science, and the Arts.
I think he's a communications professor, if I recall correctly.
Right, but I think he's got like a subspecialty of digital arts or something. And she was refused a letter of recommendation. At the time, he was given a suspension, but he basically refused to sign the letter of recommendation about 7 days after he received his tenure. So I believe this student was kind of poised to ask him for the letter of recommendation all through the summer. They had a back and forth email, which she documented, and he was waiting until after he received his tenure to refuse, based on his support for the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement.
So she wanted to study in Israel.
Yes, Tel Aviv University.
Tel Aviv University. And they had an email exchange for a while in which he sort of promised that he would write this letter.
Yes.
And at the last minute, like 7 days after he got his tenure, he informed her that because he supports the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, he's not going to be able to write this letter.
I more or less remember the exact quotes, and I think this probably really pissed off the administration. He said, "Some of us around here are engaged in a quiet, informal boycott of Israel. Therefore, I cannot write the letter."
That's not very
implying,
quiet.
he was implying that this was kind of, not acceptable.
So, right. So basically, the official message of the University of Michigan is that, and the University of Michigan, the central student government has time and time again tried to pass a BDS resolution, and they have. I think they did in 2017.
What about the faculty senate?
Who on the faculty?
Did the faculty senate pass a resolution for BDS?
That I'm not aware of, but I know that the central student government every couple of years brings this up, the BDS resolution, and they pass it. And then the University of Michigan's official statement is that we don't discriminate and we don't boycott countries. It's discriminatory, and we don't single out countries for a boycott. And then they come out with a statement saying, listing all of their relationships with Israel, and leading up to what President Ono released 2 weeks ago, reiterating his relationships with various universities in Israel. He said he checked on his colleagues at, I don't have the statement in front of me, but he checked in on his colleagues. I
want to underscore something about these BDS resolutions, and this applies to all campuses. The people who put them forth know damn well they're not going to pass in the end. I mean, they might pass with the student government, but they're going to be vetoed by the administration. They know that's going to happen. So why are they doing it? They're doing it for show. They're doing it to say that we are going to do this. And their intent is to intimidate Jewish students on campus, because this is the approach that I think you were being too kind in using the phrase bias against Israel. If you don't want to call them anti-Semites, that's okay. But these are militant anti-Zionists. I mean,
absolutely.
I think that's
absolutely. And as Noah Tishby has been saying, that, and Barry Weiss has been saying, that the mask has come off. I mean, if you didn't believe it before, believe it now. When they march Intifada or from the river to the sea, they have shown us exactly what they want. what they want to do, as shown by the horrors of October 7th. But the University of Michigan, what's also, I guess, troubling, I'm losing my frame of thought, is that the graduate employment, the GOs, the graduate educators employment organization, they have come down squarely on the side of Palestinian students in Palestine. There's no neutrality there whatsoever. And these are the people that are responsible for teaching our students in their sections. You know, you have the main lecture hall, and then you break into sections. And they had a teach-in on Friday. Of course, they always have these things conveniently, like right before Shabbat. So I think their latest teach-in, which the graduate students were encouraging their students to attend. I don't know if they were giving them extra credit, but they're like, oh, come to the teach-in. And one of the graduate students who is teaching a section in Middle East Studies, he's from Beirut. He posted on his whiteboard that blaming Hamas for firing rockets at Israel is like blaming a woman for punching her rapist. And there have been pictures that have been circulating. There's also a petition to call for this TA's ouster. I think
When was that incident? How long ago was that incident?
gosh, I'm losing track. It may have been Wednesday or Thursday.
Oh God! So this is all in the uptick after the Hamas's well, not only Hamas's rockets, but I mean, this is the mass murder of 1,400 Israelis.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And then there was this teach-in on Friday, and then somebody in the WhatsApp chat that I am engaged with parents said that someone's mezuzah had been ripped off on their dorm room on Friday evening. So you know, it's not difficult to put the pieces together of the.
Well, you know, when things like that happen, the mezuzahs being ripped off of doorposts in dorm rooms, you know, that there's no possible plausible deniability there that this is just anti-Zionism.
That's anti-Semitism. It's not anti-Zionism.
That's anti-Semitism right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, of course, the problem. I mean, whether you want to say anti-Zionism is always anti-Semitism, that's a point that's very much open to debate. Some people think it is, some people don't. But the bottom line is it's a very porous boundary, and they're going after Jews. Occasionally, they're subjecting them to litmus tests to see if they support Israel, but more often than not, they're assuming that Jews support Israel.
There's a group called Students Allied for Freedom and Equality that have been coming up time and time again. They backing up to January, if you want to talk about that, when there was Kamala Harris came to give a talk about climate change at the University of Michigan. And the organizers of this group, which goes by SAFE, decided to kind of link or intersection climate change problems with the destruction of their people in Palestine. And so they basically called for intifada revolution on campus, protesting in front of the building where Kamala Harris was speaking. And those organizers, there were two, I guess, Palestinian students, two Palestinian student women. They tried to run for president and vice president of the central student government at the University of Michigan. This was in March, I guess it was around Passover. But the University of Michigan Hillel, behind the scenes, put out this huge campaign to defeat them. And they were resoundingly defeated.
Who was defeated? Hillel was defeated, or the...
No. Hillel mobilize
okay.
the campaign to get the Jewish students to get out the word to vote not for these women.
Mhm.
And instead they actually voted in a president and vice president that cared things more about like making sure that students had access to the dining halls and expanding the dining hall hours and expanding library hours and, you know, finding funds for students that may not be able to pay for books, you know, things that like matter to students.
Right.
And then, and a backlash, these two women who ran and were lost, blamed the Zionists for spreading hateful things about them. And that's why they lost.
I want to underscore something here about Hillel. Although Hillel's national mission includes, you know, support for Israel, and they won't partner with anyone who officially endorses BDS. They're not an activist organization, and I'm a Hillel advisor on my campus, and they don't do activism. They make Shabbat dinners, they go bowling, you know, they have all sorts of things like that. Granted, there's no active anti-Zionist activism problem on my campus, but you know, unlike a group like Students for Justice in Palestine, their sole purpose is activism. Right?
That's right.
Anti-Israel, anti-Jewish activism. That's how they define themselves. They have no other purpose as they're not a cultural club on campus by any means whatsoever. And Hillel has been drawn into this activism, which is really something Hillel had no intention of ever doing, but they're being slammed as, you know, global oppressors. And it's.
I also want to mention that when this incident happened surrounding the Kamala Harris speech, where they were protesting intifada from the river to the sea, the Jewish Studies Zionist Network, we put out a statement about that, asking where are the Jewish studies professors at the University of Michigan? How come they're not condemning this? Like, they were completely silent about it. And that's actually when I reached out to you for the first time. I wanted the Detroit Jewish News to know about our statement, right? That we need to get some traction up there. That why are the Jewish studies professors so silent on this?
I'll quote exactly from our statement here. The University of Michigan has one of the most prestigious Jewish studies programs in the United States. The Jean and Samuel Frankel Center for Judaic Studies includes dozens of eminent scholars who are well aware of how such a spectacle can create a climate of hostility for the university's Jewish student population. Yet we have not heard a single Jewish studies professor at UM express outrage. We call on Jewish studies professors at UM to endorse this statement for the sake of the college's Jewish students and Ann Arbor's Jewish community. Many of them feel a deep connection with the state of Israel, and they should be able to look to your program's professors for public support. Silence in the face of violent threats constitutes complicity. So we made a direct call to Jewish studies, and we were ignored, except by one professor, right? And
well, that one professor wasn't entirely on our side either, though, right?
Nope. And he's someone who is not an anti-Zionist. Yeah. What did he say exactly? And I guess this was on Facebook, because I'm trying to recall where it transpired.
Well, he disagreed that the protests were anti-Semitic, and said something to the effect that
one second, Stacy, were those anti-Semitic protests, since you were there on the ground pretty much?
Well, I wasn't there on the ground, but I saw footage, and you know, there is only one solution: Intifada revolution.
Yes,
I'd say that's pretty anti-Semitic, since what we have seen evidenced after October 7th.
Because Kamala Harris, she's made it known that she's for the two-state solution. So their response was, no, that's not the solution. The only solution
is an intifada.
Is the intifada,
which is slaughter of Jews, essentially.
Yes.
Well, whether you want to say it's slaughter of all Jews, Antifada by definition means terrorism against Israelis.
Well, I mean, since Hamas has in its charter that they're going to kill all
absolutely.
Jews, I would say.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out that the second Intifada involved terrorism in which over 1,000 Israelis were killed, including the blowing up of a Passover Seder in Netanya, which was undertaken by Hamas. But it wasn't just Hamas. The PLO, Fatah were heavily involved. So after the second Intifada doesn't mean uprising.
And you know what was also interesting about that time was the Michigan Daily. I don't know if you saw the articles written in the Michigan Daily by. It was so one-sided. It was written by a Muslim woman, and I looked at her. I was trying to get honest reporting to look into this, that the face of the woman who was leading the protest, and the face of the student who wrote the article seemed very similar. Like they like Honest Reporting couldn't confirm it was the same person. But then again, it was completely one-sided, this article. It didn't mention any reference to terror attacks against Israelis. And I think that was a relatively quiet time, right? This was not May of 2021, which I also covered.
Well, 1 second. I just want to go back to one here because I've interrupted. Adam, what was that Jewish studies professor? I'm going to name him, Professor Jeffrey Weidlinger. He's a very prominent Russian Jewish historian. I've known him since the mid-90s. How did he finish up?
Well, if memory serves, because it was
It sounds familiar, so I think you're quoting accurately.
He said that the protests were going on outside of his classroom while he was conducting a class, and he used this as an opportunity to talk about the protests with his students. And his students all agreed, I think he said unanimously or something, they all agreed that this was not an anti-Semitic protest.
As a professor with a PhD in Jewish studies, studying an anti-Semitic country like the Russian Empire, don't you think he should have intervened at that point and tried, without trying to impose his political views on them, explain to him why this is triggering to Jewish students in such a way that is taken to be anti-Semitism, especially by the vocabulary that's being used? I mean,
well, that's what I would have done, and if this were going on outside my classroom.
Absolutely, I would have done it in a second. Yeah. So that's I don't consider that to be responsible teaching, to be perfectly honest with you. That's great that he initially solicited feedback from his students. I think that's.
I mean, there's historical references. I mean, I am no professor of history, but knowing our Jewish history, we know what the Cossacks did when they marched. We know what the Nazis did. They marched to rile themselves up before the violence happened. And I think another challenge that we have is that I think we have a generation of Jews, age 30 and under, that either don't know their history or don't feel the connection to Israel. They are a generation that are moving away from a living memory of listening to a Holocaust survivor speak, and they don't know their history.
Mm-hmm.
And when they encounter anti-Semitism,
they want to be politically correct, and they want to show that they are human and for human rights, and they want to fit in. Another problem on the campus.
I'll just add that being for human rights on campus means that you have to be an anti-Zionist, otherwise you're not admitted to the club.
Essentially, yes. Right. Check your Zionism at the door.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even check it at the door. It's efface it completely from your identity, and we're going to double check on that.
I don't want to confuse anyone. I do think good pedagogy is not just, it's not being rah-rah Israel either. Like,
of course
a
not.
conversation could be had in the classroom about the Palestinians' point of view and their perspective and their argument and the valid concerns that they may have. Like, that should be brought in. But that is not obviously the case here. That's not, the lies are being told, a lot of dishonesty. Stacy, I want to ask you, do you
for the purpose of intimidating Jewish students on campus? Exactly. This is not about the conflict itself. This is about harassing Jewish students in the United States.
Right. Stacy, do you remember, this was a while back, several years ago, there was an incident in Ann Arbor. It was a University of Michigan student who went into a convenience store that was owned and operated by a Jewish entrepreneur. And there was a Stand with Israel flyer poster on the window of his store. Mm-hmm. And she was furious. She told the man that unless he takes it down, she's going to rally Michigan students to boycott his establishment. We're no longer going to buy it. This was all caught on camera. I don't know if the video is still available or not. Probably is somewhere. Do you remember that?
I'm not familiar with that, but I know of many other. This was a Jewish student who did this?
No, I don't know whether it was a Jewish student or not.
That I don't know about, but I am aware, getting back to stuff on campus, there was a student named Jesse Arm. He was a Jewish student. He was serving on the central student government. And it was, gosh, I think it was 2015. during the violence, what was going on. I believe he was friends with someone who was in Israel. He was volunteering. He went into the gush, and his bus, he was bringing, I think, snacks or food to soldiers, and his bus was ambushed and he was killed in a terror attack. I believe he was from Westchester County, family, four kids, and Jesse Arm knew him. And on the same day that was going on, Jesse was processing that, and the Student Alliance for Freedom and Equality had put up their apartheid wall. Okay. And Jesse was very emotional, and he saw this wall and he started yelling at them, and it said, resist. And he said, no, we need to coexist, not resist. Resistance is the wrong way of approaching. We need to coexist. And he was so upset. And the Central Student Government brought him up on ethics charges for conflict of interest. It was the only time in the University of Michigan's history of the Central Student Government that any student had been brought up on ethics charges.
What was the conflict of interest exactly that they're claiming?
Because he was Jewish and he was serving on the Central Student Government, and his support of Israel and his rallying cry against the apartheid wall, against that, display, made him appear that he couldn't be objective.
That's ridiculous. And that would never happen to anyone else.
Right.
No, of course not.
Right. That's one of the earliest articles I could remember writing.
What was the verdict? Was he found guilty of ethics violations?
I think he was found guilty. I have to find my article. This was back in 2015 or 2014.
That's crazy. Well, the reason I mentioned the convenience store thing is that the student was quoting all kinds of lies about Israel to this man. Obviously, things that she was learning in her classes at the University of Michigan. What were they teaching students there?
I could share a personal story. I had my son's friend had a friend who was estranged from his family, and we took him in, and he was very bright. He had an amazing GPA. He got a full ride to the University of Michigan. He lived in our house for 4 months. He knew he wasn't Jewish. He knew, that we were Jewish and ardent Zionists, and tried to teach him about it. And within 6 weeks of being on the campus of the University of Michigan, he was fully indoctrinated in the whole free Palestine. He turned on us. Wow. And that's another thing. I think people are students and young adults are feeling betrayal of their friends in progressive circles. They are feeling that betrayal when they come to the aid of Black Lives Matter or any progressive cause. And then when it's their turn, when they need the support, they're met either with at best silence, or at worst, going along with the Palestinian narrative that, Israel is the oppressor and colonizer, and there's this impenetrable barrier to facts. And so there's some kind of, I want to say, indoctrination going on, but I don't think Michigan is alone in this.
Oh, of course not. No.
I think this is happening on every campus. It's happening on my alma mater. I see it.
What's your alma mater?
I went to Rutgers University.
Oh God, yeah. All right. Well, they have a professor there who published a book with Duke University Press, Jasmine Moore, claiming that Israel engages in body snatching and harvesting organs. I mean, it's a book straight out of the Middle Ages,
right?
Shrouded in the language of disability studies, which is an allegedly progressive academic field. I think it's complete junk, but that's just my personal opinion. So I'm not surprised Rutgers is an issue, of course.
Right.
So that, you know, our goal here is to try to get as many people who are on, you know, who've been covering different campuses, you know, locally, just to get a sense of how much of this is alarmism and how much of this is actually happening on the ground. And the story you just told about a student being brainwashed is really very Jewish, not Jewish students, right?
Not Jewish.
Yeah, is very chilling. I mean, it is very chilling.
Mhm.
You know, I get it. Undergraduates, especially first and second year, they're susceptible to this stuff. They want to be with the in crowd, and of course, you know, everyone's a leftist when they're at that age to a certain degree. So they're gonna, you know, sign off on those causes and then look back in embarrassment probably 10 years later. And the ticket of admission is anti-Zionism. You have to condemn Israel. And if you don't condemn Israel, that means you are part of the oppressors. And if you're part of the oppressors, that means you're in favor of white supremacy and fascism. That's the logic, right?
Right. And can I also say that in the school year 2018, 2019, there was also a case where another student, she took on the university. I mean, she was an art student. She had to attend a penny stamped School of Design, a mandatory assembly, where a former Black Panther came on campus and gave this, like, he was showing like his political cartoons to a penny stamped lecture. Are you familiar with the penny stamp School of Design?
I'm not, but Adam collects quirky things, so maybe he knows.
It's like the art school at the University of Michigan, and they have these lecture series that are free, open to the public, but sometimes students are required to go to attend. And so this student it was mandated that she went, and a former Black Panther got up and put a picture side by side, I believe, of Adolf Hitler and Benjamin Netanyahu.
I saw your article about that.
Under the side by side images, the word was genocide. She had to sit through that, and she and her mom really try to put up a big fight. Every now and again, every 4 years or so, you have students and trying to supported by their parents, trying to get audience with the administration to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism that says that singling out Israel or singling out the Israeli government is a form of anti-Semitism. Because these Jewish student activists, these pro-Israel students, they believe that you can't define anti-Semitism. It has to be defined. It has to have a definition, a set in stone definition, like the IHRA definition. And so they try to have a meeting, and then they get so fed up and they say, well, frankly, I just can't wait to have my kid get out of there and graduate, and then they're done. And then
who did they want to adopt the IHRA? The administration?
They want the administration to adopt it. And I believe that that's happened there are some colleges that have adopted it.
Quite a few.
The University of Michigan has yet to adopt it.
Well, I mean, there is a legitimate debate about whether universities should be adopting, you know, rigid definitions about anything. I mean, how many universities actually have a definition of racism, which, you know, point by point, you know, explains what it is. With the issue with the IHRA is that, and here we get back to Jewish studies again, the leading Jewish studies scholars, or the ones who claim to be the leading Jewish studies scholars, issued a counter definition called the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism. And it explicitly undermines many of the points that are in the IHRA, including the so-called double standard. They basically say double standards are okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, and here's the real problem. And here you see why Jewish studies genuinely does not care about anti-Semitism on their campuses. There has been anti-Israel activity which falls under the Jerusalem declarations of anti-Semitism. Especially when you impugn stereotypes to Israel that have been traditionally deployed against the Jews in other times and spaces. So if you liken the Jews to Nazis, you know, maybe they have some way of kind of justifying it. But if it goes beyond that and they talk about Zionism being a global threat, as the CUNY Law School graduate did, global threats, right? That's what the Nazis said. The international Jew was engaged in a campaign of trying to take over the globe and establish a supremacist regime. And she was basically attributing that to Israel. I mean, that's anti-Semitism according to the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism. Yet, not a word from any of the authors. Right? They figured, okay, we could issue our statement. Look, we're clean. We're not anti-Semites, and then just ignore it and allow anti-Semitism to proliferate on their campus. So the JDA is actually quite a harmful definition, but even its authors are not willing to try to enforce it, even when there is blatant anti-Semitism here. It is a real problem. The battle over the definitions is God, it's a whole separate issue. But I mean, I think the IHRA is a really solid definition. It doesn't rule out criticism of Israel. Of course, you can criticize Israel. I hate Bibi. I'll say that right now. I would never vote for him under any circumstances. But that doesn't negate my support for Israel's government. And I'm not going to tell Israelis what to do either. I don't pay taxes. I haven't served in the IDF. I don't live there. I will stand by Israel with whatever decisions its citizens choose to make. So, but I'm still criticizing the government, right?
Right.
Quite openly.
And this was the talk of my rabbi's Kol Nidre sermon about, like, before this October 7th happened, is that we all hold an image of Israel. We're holding that image of what we envision Israel to be, to those ideals. And he talked about all of the Israelis that have come out in record number for months and months to protest, to hang on to their democracy. And those people are criticizing the Israeli government up, every which way, but they're not anti-Zionist.
Not at all. Not
right.
at least.
So, right.
Yeah, so, and that's a problem. There is a growing disconnect, I think, between certainly the Israeli leftists and the diaspora. There was one statement which we've discussed numerous times, the elephant in the room, it is called, which is basically an attack on the current Israeli government. Now, although they exaggerate things and use terms such as apartheid, which I don't believe is correct, it was a statement that, from the perspective of an Israeli leftist up to that point, looks okay. We are criticizing our own government here, and that's why it got a lot of Israeli signatures. But if you read on, the statement goes on to blame American Jewish billionaires for funding Jewish supremacy. Right there, you fall into the anti-Semitic trap. Now, the Israelis who sign that, I mean, they're basically signing off on, diaspora Jewry getting assaulted because because it's using traditional anti-Semitic tropes. They're really not thinking beyond their own country. And it's not a statement directed at Israelis, because then it would have been written in Hebrew and, actually, only open for Israeli signatures. This was intended, and that part was intended to intimidate diaspora Jews, which I think is ultimately the goal here, to get diaspora Jews, especially on college campuses, to not only hide their Zionism, but at the end of the day, to renounce their Zionism. I think that's wanted here. The people who write these statements, both in Jewish studies and outside Jewish studies, believe that cultivating a climate or signing off on a climate of anti-Semitism might somehow help their project of, well, for some of them on the left, far on the left, of liquidating the state of Israel, which is so utterly unethical and abhorrent. And as we hear from you, Jewish students on campus are paying the price for this.
They are, but they did come together in a vigil, I have to say. I mean, they filled the entire diag. I saw pictures, it was just wall-to-wall people in a peaceful vigil, candlelight. So they are kind of standing strong that way. They did come out, together as a presence. And I do believe there is another vigil to support Israel in Ann Arbor. Not necessarily, I don't think it's connected with the university, but it is the town of Ann Arbor, that they're having another vigil tonight. I don't know what kind of numbers they're going to get.
Is the town a problem too, or it's really just the university?
Yes. Have you heard about Mr. Herskovitz?
No, I haven't. Please tell us.
So that there's a synagogue in Ann Arbor that every single Shabbat for, I guess it's now 14 years, there's been a man who's Jewish. He's also a Holocaust denier. He will stand outside with anti-Israel protesters protesting outside every Shabbat. anti-Israel stuff.
And
Yeah.
he's Jewish, of course, Herskovich.
And he's Jewish. He's Jewish. And I believe that I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but I know that there have been cases that have been brought up to the Supreme Court and they lost their case. And I think they need to pay. The synagogue needs to pay. I mean, I don't have it in front of me. They lost a lawsuit against for their civil rights to make these protests stop. I believe the protests started because this man used to be a member of the synagogue and he objected to the presence of the Israeli flag on the bima. And the board of the synagogue said, no, we're not taking off the Israeli flag. And he's been protesting against them ever since. And these protests, you know, especially the length of time they've been going on, have drawn national attention. And it's my friends, you know, go there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's issue. I mean, synagogues, there are some synagogues too that are going to the far left. There's one quite openly, hopefully there's still an exception at this point, in Chicago. Rabbi, I'm putting it in quotes because I don't accept religion.
Oh, the Tzedek synagogue, Tzedek something.
Yeah. Rabbi
Yeah.
Brandon Rosen. Okay, you know, I mean, they're militantly anti-Zionist. He's militantly anti-Zionist. And well, I suppose it's okay. I mean, this country's all about religious freedom. And if you don't like what one denomination's doing, you break off and, you know, you form your own denomination. But he actually had on Yom Kippur a number of years ago, it was either 2018 or 19, he actually invited Stephen Salaita, former professor, now bus driver.
Oh, yes.
He actually invited him to give the Yom Kippur sermon. I can't think of
I
anything.
think this year, Omar Bogoti, the head of the Yes movement, I think he was invited to one of these quote unquote synagogues.
Wow. Okay. Well, if it's the same one, they've really. I didn't think they could outdo themselves, but they've done it. Yeah. Congratulations, you've done it. Next on the roster, Adolf Hitler, if they could find his body. Yeah. No, this is really terrible. I mean,
I go up to Ann Arbor now and then to eat at Zingerman's. I never see anything like this when I go there. But
Ann Arbor is a great place. I mean, we love going to Ann Arbor. We go there all the time. It's you know, it's a fun place to go. I've been to the Big House. It's definitely a spiritual experience, you know.
How is there spillover from all of this onto the campus or vice versa?
Yeah, maybe vice versa.
You mean the events?
Well, like the story you told about the protester outside the synagogue, all of these things that are happening in Ann Arbor. You know, I certainly, like, for example, what happened with the student that I mentioned at the convenience store, it was obviously that this was what she was learning on campus. To what extent does that guy get support from the university campus, from professors there? I'm
not aware. I'm not aware of who his compadres are who join him in these protests. I'm not aware of that. You know, I did once have an interview with him that, you know, I tried not to vomit in my mouth, that he was arguing with me on the presence of the gas chambers, that they really didn't exist.
Has he gone there to Auschwitz and Treblinka and taken a look?
Yeah, he also funded, there was a billboard campaign once that said America first, not Israel. Remember Deir Yassin, which was the village that Israel presumably destroyed back during the War of Independence. That he was one of the sponsors of these bulletin boards, and there was a campaign to have the bulletin board removed. I'm just like, I've become like the anti-Semitism correspondent. Like, all these incidents are just like stacked one on top of the other that I'm recalling.
Yeah, the number of emails or direct messages on Facebook with screenshots and whatnot that I get every day at this point is astounding. You know, it's really like everyone is coming to me about it. And Adam and I are trying to run this operation, which has over 190 signatures at this point, but we're really doing it, you know, by ourselves. And it's growing, and it's a lot of work. Before we near the hour mark, I would like to talk a little bit more about the recent blowouts involving both the law clubs, involving President Ono's statement. Just first on the law clubs, what ended up happening was that they issued this outrageous statement, which I can't seem to find online. I forget who sent it to me originally, but this is the quote from it that I put in the statement that we issued. Until yesterday, Israel, so it's the day after the October 7th massacre. Until yesterday, Israel had gotten exceedingly comfortable with the mass subjugation of the Palestinian people. They wrongly and smugly assumed that the Palestinian people would lie low and accept oppression as a status quo. Now that the Palestinians are fighting for justice, please note that mass murdering 1,400 Jews is, quote, fighting for justice. Western nations in Israel scream terrorism. Okay, so it's not terrorism? Because surely the brown people are terrorists. Never a people choke beyond compare and fighting for their land themselves.
Have they looked at the population of this IDF soldiers? Did they look at this color of their skin? I'm wondering.
Oh, they're not interested. You know, they have to fit everything into their little boxes.
Yeah.
You know, Israelis are white and Palestinians are brown, and it's impossible for brown people to commit terrorism, or it's impossible for brown people to not be oppressed, because these are the boxes created by the social justice movement in the United States. Now that the Palestinians are fighting for justice, Western nations, and they scream terrorism, never a people choke beyond compare. Okay, so there's never people in the world who have suffered as much as the Palestinians. I could draw you a graph right now and show you this is complete bullshit. And fighting for their land and themselves till their last breath. In their tainted coverage, the mainstream media and politicians maintain that Palestinians in Gaza are not a people with a right to defend themselves. Moreover, propaganda is spewed that Palestinians are invading Israel. I'm a professor, and I will say, you know, point blank, that what happened was an invasion. Even if we're not going to leave the massacre aside from before, they invaded Israel. Unless they believe that Israel is their land, and I think they actually do believe that.
They do believe that.
Yeah.
Well, the word invasion simply means.
Okay, but it's the next clause. But how can Palestinians invade their own land? Okay, so right there, that denies Israel's right to exist.
Right.
That this is genuinely the Palestinian people's lands. And this was signed by Law Students for Justice in Palestine, Black Law Students Association. What does this have to do with Black students? What did Israel ever do to them? What did Jews ever do to them?
Because they're people of color, and therefore
Exactly. And there's a whole bunch of National Lawyers Guild, Res Sista Loquitur, Women of Color, coalitions.
This is at the University of Michigan?
Yes, this is University of Michigan.
This is new on me. I'm just.
Well, I thought I forwarded that to you. I got this.
Sorry, I apologize if I did.
I have a former student who's up there now.
Right.
He sent
so
that.
I apologize if I didn't see that. Things have been coming to me at rapid.
That's been making the rounds up there.
But I do, but I have I've been more closely following what the university, what parents are doing.
Let me just finish up here with this. In our statement, we demanded that Jewish studies speak up. The faculty of UMichigan's Jean Frankel Center for Judaic Studies, consisting of 90 professors and affiliates, their website includes their graduate students too, I think that's why I said 90, have offered nothing but a deafening silence. We demand that the center's director, Dr. Maya Barzilai, Associate Professor of Hebrew Literature and Jewish Culture, condemn the vilification of Israel and the justification of Hamas. Their silence endangers the Jewish student body at UMichigan. Not a word until Professor Jeffrey Weidlander came onto my Facebook page and claims that they are doing stuff, that they're having rallies and things, but they haven't made the news. Why haven't they made the news? Why aren't they issuing a national statement? Because the world is looking on, or at least the nation is looking on, and they're not going to send their students to Michigan. If the Judaic Studies program can't even stand up to such a defense of terrorism, it's awful. So I'm sorry, let's get back to what you were saying now about parents and President Ono and stuff like that, because that's a whole other layer.
Yeah, so I've been following what parents have been trying to do. They're trying to mobilize a couple of approaches before Parents Weekend. They're trying to get audience with President Ono. They are trying to teach their kids how to mobilize on campus. They have a petition that is calling for the severe censor or to be put on probation of the faculty that signed on to a open letter that did not agree with Ono's initial statement. That talked about the open letter against ONO opened up with paragraphs that basically said that Israel is a systemic apartheid state. And about 900 members of the faculty and staff have signed on to this.
980, I have it open right here as of
Yeah,
an hour
including
ago.
some members of the Judaic Studies Department.
I found one. There might be more, but I just
Yeah.
as we were talking, Professor Raphael Nates of the history department, who teaches I think ancient Judaism and rabbinics, signed it. 70 professors from the history department definitely signed it.
Right. So
And
parents,
25 political science professors signed it.
Political science seem to be more rational in this case than historians, I guess.
So parents and students are both very concerned that, you know, they are going to be academically penalized if they are pro-Israel or express any kind of pro-Israel views in and out of class. They're afraid for their grades. They are afraid for their safety. Because of ONO's initial statement, basically the Students for Justice in Palestine are safe, what they're called on the University of Michigan campus. They had a rally where they were marching and then they were kind of camped out in front of ONO's residence, saying, "Oh no, oh no, you can't hide. You need to mention Palestine."
They should have said genocide because that would have rhymed at least. They're pretty.
Quick question. Why is the SJP there not under the SJP umbrella? Why do they have a different?
You know, that's a good question. They have this very innocuous sounding name, Students Allied for Freedom and Equality. You go to the Maze pages, that's the website where you find all listings of student organizations. You can't find a contact number. You can't find someone to contact a board. I can't find their Instagram account anymore. I can't find their Facebook account. I think they've kind of gone a little quiet.
It's just as Vladimir Lenin laid out. What is to be done.
It's just names. Yeah, I don't know why
they don't actually have an SJP then.
No, they do.
So there's a separate organization.
No,
it's
no.
the same thing.
They don't go by Students for Justice in Palestine. They go for Students Allied for Freedom and Equality. I don't know why they don't just take on the SJP. I don't know.
SJP is a very decentralized organization. The national umbrella group claims that they are not accountable for anything the affiliates say, and the affiliates do not have to follow the line of national SJP, which is a great get out of jail free card for everyone. And it's a tactic. It's a tactic to get away with things, right? And of course, they're very deceptive. They hide. They don't make their information public all the time. They're very difficult to contact. They take the playbook right out of Vladimir Lenin's "What is to be done," you know, and how to create a conspiratorial organization.
Right. And I know that I think tomorrow there's going to be some kind of an informational meeting on Zoom for run by Hillel. Hillel has said that they have been having meetings with the dean of students. I don't know what that means, but they're having an informational meeting for parents. You have to be a parent to sign up, so I am not privy to that. But you know, it's very troubling to me that this letter starts with, you know, the result that this attack, they didn't say terrorism, they didn't say Hamas, they said that the violence was the result of decades-long occupation and structural apartheid for 75 years, meaning not 1967, not the, you know, oh, if we just give back the land from 1967, it's the whole thing. It's the whole shebang. It's from 1948.
Their project is to liquidate Israel, and they're willing to use violence to do so. I mean, it's
and the fact that history professors would sign off on this, they're denying the facts on the historical facts on the ground.
Absolutely,
and that's very troubling.
Before we elevate academics to some sort of noble status, which is very much undeserved, I do want to point out that in Nazi Germany, The average German did not vote for Hitler because they were anti-Semites. They were okay with his program, which makes them responsible, right? They said, okay, we'll overlook his anti-Semitism. He's going to, make the economy bloom. He's going to make Germany great again. He's going to, tell France to go fuck itself. He's going to get us out of depression. He's an anti-Semite. Yeah, maybe the Jews have too much influence. Maybe it'll be better if they just kind of go away. But Hitler's virulent anti-Semitic program did have its backers. Aside from his closest henchmen, thousands of people active in the universities, students, graduate students, and professors in the early 1900s, going all the way up to the 1930s. 3 out of 4 leaders of the Einsatz group in the mobile killing squads had PhDs. One of them had 2 PhDs. They called him Doctor. So, the idea that somehow education is an antidote to committing genocide, it's just simply not true. Very often, the most serious backers of it. I mean, look at the people involved in the Bosnian genocide. They were all very well-educated people. Slobodan Milosevic, not Slobodan Milosevic, but the other guy was a doctor. Radovan Karadzic, I think, was a doctor. Franjo Trudzman of Croatia was actually a professional historian who apparently wrote a decent book on the topic of nationalism at one point in his career. So, yeah.
And some of the Nazis, I remember reading Dara Horn's book, People Love Dead Jews. Some of the Nazis in the Third Reich were educated at Harvard.
Yeah, no, it's a real problem.
Do you know anything about how the alumni are responding?
People are really quiet. I have to say that my friends here who, like I said, bleed maize and blue, they are not getting vocal on social media about this. They're very quiet. It's the out-of-state parents that are always the most vocal because their view is, I live in California, I live in New York, I am paying out-of-state tuition for this. It's the out-of-state parents that always are the ones to reach out to me, not the ones from Michigan. And I've noticed this pattern ever since I started covering stuff like this.
What about donors? Have donors of Michigan started to press Penn and other places?
They have not been vocal about this. I know that that's another tactic that parents want to do. They want to start getting lists of the donors, the big donors on campus.
Well, the people who fund the Frankel Center of Jewish Studies should certainly be contacted at this point, and they should be informed.
Yeah, I know that this is part of the strategy that these parents are trying to do to mobilize, and they're seeing this as not like a one and done. They're like, this is a long-term thing. This has been they acknowledge this has been building for a long time, and they're like, enough is enough, and this is going to be a long-term approach. In the past, I've spoken to parents, I've spoken to alumni, that recent alumni who were the ones who I wrote about. And I asked them, what do you think? They're like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. They're like, I'm done, I'm graduated, I'm out of there. I don't want to deal with it anymore. I fought my fight when I was there and now I'm done.
Well, their fight wasn't very successful, it seems. We're nearing the hour mark. Just at the end of the day here, should Jewish parents not send their children to the University of Michigan? Should they send them elsewhere? Because there's lots of other good colleges in this country, and not all of them are anti-Semitic.
It's so hard because Michigan, I know when we moved here for the reason that, our kids can go to the best public universities on the globe. And I don't know if we all pull away, then we're not saying that we don't have a right to send our kids to get this great education. I don't have the answer to that, because I think this is becoming systemic in almost every university. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter from a private university. My niece was at Smith, and then she's not at Smith anymore. She transferred it to a school in Atlanta. I am seeing parents speculate about withdrawing their kids, and then I'm seeing other parents argue, no, we have to stay. I think that an education you know, is worth the fight.
Mhm.
Sometimes I feel like, yeah, what it's overrated, and look how our Jewish students are being treated. But in the end of the day, we need that educate, you know, that's a right. I believe it's almost like, I don't know if it's, I don't know, I'm not a law professor, I don't know if it's a civil right.
Well,
Are
it's not a good
we
place
being
for,
denied, are our Jewish students being denied their civil right to access
it's
education?
not a good education though, if this is what they're learning there.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have to, it sounds like students have two choices. One, they have to hide their Jewish identity, which, you know, I'd say for a large percentage of Jews is possible. Not everybody's name is Horowitz or Levy. I could pass if I
Or
had
Fuller
to.
or Canny.
What? If
Or Fuller or
I could pass if I had to, probably. But so they either have to hide their identity if possible, or they're going to get conscripted into activism. They're not going to have a choice, right? They're going to have to fight back. And not everyone wants to have to go for that to be part of their college experience.
Or they kind of lay low and just like, I'm going to get out of here and get good grades, and, you know, I'm going to be successful. Because I think at the end of the game, like when I've tried to get students to try to interview students, they're always too busy. They're studying, they're working. These are our Jewish students that they are just trying to be successful and keep their head down and get the grades and move on. And that is also a trend that I have observed.
Well, that's what the Jews did in the interwar era, going into the late 40s, when there were quotas against Jews in the universities. You know, I have relatives in my family who couldn't get into McGill in Canada medical school because Jews needed a higher GPA to get in than non-Jews. And the strategy back then was to fight your way in, and once you're there, just work, because you're going to get out, get your education, and you're going to build something for yourself. But, you know, there's a couple of important points here. One, this was before the Holocaust. Okay, so anti-Semitism took on a whole new meaning after the Holocaust. Second, this was also in an era before civil rights and before, you know, multiculturalism as we have it today, where minorities have what is claimed to be an inherent right to express their identity in public. In the 1930s, you didn't really have that right, and minorities were supposed to lay low in general, right? I mean, the difference, of course, is back then the discrimination was coming from the white Christian power structure. Today, the discrimination is coming from the minorities, very often through intimidation, and not necessarily even from positions of power, but they're scaring the people in positions of power to keep their mouths shut. So, I mean, today it's all, I mean, given the activism of so many other minority groups, I mean, the Jews need to fight back. But not every Jew who wants to go to college wants to do this.
Right, right. They want to just get their education. They don't want to, they don't want to fight.
But some of them want to be able to.
I think it's also very interesting that Jews are, you know, so they support every cause. They stick up for every cause, for every minority. And in a college campus where you're encouraged to live your truth, whether you're minority, your ethnic background, your sexuality. And it's really tragic to me that our Jewish students are not allowed to live out loud their truth if they support Israel or if they resign.
And there's the problem, because groups like Hillel, which is, you know, the national flagship Jewish organization on campus, are getting conscripted into activism because a lot of this bullying and harassment is being done toward Hillel students, irrespective of what they might be doing vis-a-vis Israel. So it's like, okay, well, you're part of Hillel. That means you're a Zionist, white supremacist, fascist. Therefore, you're a legitimate target. So that means that they really can't have an outlet for their Jewish identity on campus if the flagship Jewish organization is getting harassed. And therefore, Hillel does need to fight back, which is not something that Hillel...
Or new organizations like maybe Stand With Us needs to have a student group on campuses. There's also Students Standing for Israel, which is a new group that's emerging that needs to emerge more on college
and
campuses.
here
Camera is very active on college
and
campuses.
Jew hatred is also very nimble, and they're getting around.
Well, these other groups need to merge because they sound like there's too many of them, and they need to really, you know, I'm not calling for an end of Hillel by any means whatsoever. I am a Hillel advisor.
No, you're just pointing out that that's not their function. Activism is not their function.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I think,
of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Jewish students need to either fight back somehow with this kind of activism, or I hate to say it, go somewhere else. I recommend for a good Michigan school, send your kids to Hillsdale. Best classical liberal arts education in the country, best university president.
Oh, you're going to have a lot of pushback about that from the less conservative people, believe you
I
me.
know, but
Adam is a
Yeah.
conservative.
Yeah,
yeah, I have to get that
It's-
in.
yeah.
I'm a big fan of Larry Arnn in Hillsdale. So you'll get a great education there, and you will also not get any of this garbage.
Mhm.
Well, look, I did my PhD at Berkeley, and I kept away, in Russian.
Oh, so did my husband.
Oh, really? So when was he there?
He got his PhD 90 to 95 in chemical engineering.
Okay, I was there in 97. I took a hiatus for a couple of years, and then 2002 to 2008, PhD in Russian and Jewish
It did
history.
not overlap.
I kept away from the Jewish studies program because I saw the problem there. And that's really where it all began, with Daniel Boyarin and Judith Butler. And the students were all obnoxious. So I hung out with the Russian historians. They were a much better crowd.
Yeah, we hung out at Hillel. I mean, we were very active, and we had like a little grad student havara. We did our own thing. He stayed in his lab as a grad student, chemical engineering. They really, with their chemicals and their engineering, they really are not very actively politically involved, So yeah, but we had some good years there, but there was some anti-Israel. There was oh my gosh, I can't remember. There was a Holocaust denier that came to speak on campus, and we went to a protest.
Well,
But
I could tell you I was the TA for the first time, and I think it might have been the last time. I think they only did it one time. They taught an intro to Jewish studies course for undergrads. This country has like the best scholarly speaking faculty in Jewish studies, in the world, and they couldn't even get their act together to have a minor for undergraduates until 2004 or 5. I was TA the first semester, and the students were all, comfortably Zionists. And week after week, you had a different professor come in every week, and I'd say 75% of the professors were pretty much militant anti-Zionists. And there would inevitably be like a major fight, or there would be a fight in class. But when I would come in to lead my discussion section later in the week, the students would just be livid about the faculty and what they were peddling. So yeah, no, Berkeley is definitely a problem, but it's been a problem for many decades. That's where Students for Justice in Palestine. Well, no, that's where Jewish Voice for Peace was launched initially.
well, actually, Omar Baboti, he's the founder of the BDS movement.
Yeah.
Berkeley.
Yeah, so in the 90s, they launched from there, and gradually, I have a friend who was actually at one of their inaugural meetings, not because they wanted to participate, but they wanted to, check it out and see what was going on. And she said it got progressively worse from that point, and they've turned into the travesty that they are today. We probably should finish up since we've gone over an hour, which is something we try to avoid but never seem to be able to do. Is there any last things you would like to say, Stacy?
No, this is just gonna go on, and I'm afraid I'm not optimistic. But maybe this is something that Jewish students, I feel like, have been very comfortable and very complacent. We've had a good run. Maybe this will motivate them, will ignite some kind of fight in them, I hope.
Well, it sounds like they are pushing back at Michigan
for themselves. Yeah. But there is a lot to kvetch about.
Well,
that's what we do here.
Yeah, and they need to get more faculty support, which they're obviously not getting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a terrific hour and 5 minutes.
Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Stacy.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And thanks for keeping up on this story and covering it. It's really important.
Yeah, Michigan seems to be one of the hot spots at the moment, and we got to ensure that we hold their faculty and administration accountable for what they're doing. Okay. All right, well, this is Jarrod Tanney, Adam Fuller, and Stacy Gittleman signing off. Thank you for joining us. Title of this episode to be announced.